So welcome everyone. This is the March Zoom speaker series presentation. I'm Ian Thomas Binyami, VP of Member Ed. And as you know, we have these meetings every month or so where we're inviting in speakers from across the country and across the world to talk about bees. Tonight, I'm very excited to be welcoming Julia Mahood from Georgia. Thank you, Julia, for being here. I'll say a few words of introduction, and then we'll turn it over to Julia for her presentation on drones. Julia Mahood is a Georgia master crafts beekeeper who has been keeping bees since 2004, and she created the citizen science website mapmydca.com to gather data on drone congregation areas. Julia was awarded the Georgia Beekeeper of the Year in 2018. A graphic artist, she designed the Georgia Save the Honeybee license plate. She's passionate about education and teaches beekeeping in Georgia prisons. Julia is currently the president of the Georgia Beekeepers Association. Thank you very much, Julia, especially given the time difference for joining us tonight.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Ian. Y'all ready to hear about drones? So I was just telling Ian, I used to call this Game of Drones, and it had all kinds of silly jokes in it, but now it's just all about the drones. And it's if you remember back when you first learned about beekeeping, you were probably told that drones are freeloaders, they're a drain on resources, they're no good, but drones are integral to the colony, and they have a really interesting biology. And so hopefully at the end of my talk, you will appreciate drones a little bit more than you did before. A couple of notes of housekeeping. I did all the illustrations in the presentation, and people usually ask about at the end, so I'll just tell you up front, you're welcome to take pictures and share. And at the end, I'll have a QR code with references and links of the things that there's little references at the bottom of the slides and a few videos I'll mention. So you can wait until then and scan the code, and I'll probably paste it in the chat as well, the link. So to start at the beginning, just some colony basics. Everyone knows that in a typical booming colony in the spring, there's usually one queen, about 60,000 workers, and maybe 6,000 drones at the most. So the drones are definitely underrepresented in the colony. And in a lineup, the queen is the tallest, but the drone weighs more. He weighs about 100 milligrams more, and he's shorter and stockier, and the workers look so tiny and cute next to the drones and that big old queen. There's so many drones in my colonies right now. I was looking for a queen today, and I had a hard time finding her because I was so distracted by all the drones. So this is a drone next to two of his sisters, and you can see the big telltale sign that it's a drone, or his eyes look like they kind of meet in the middle. They're so huge. And he's got a blunt-tipped abdomen. It's not pointy like his sisters. And because drones only live to be 21 or 22 days, they always look young and hot, like this guy on the right. Before I get into drones specifically, just some basic colony survival. For a single colony to survive, they have to have a queen, and they have to have workers, and they have to have food. Sort of like for an individual human to live, you have to have food, shelter, and water, right? But for the species to survive and for humans to reproduce, you'd have to have more than just one person. So drones are absolutely integral to the survival of the species because they're going to mate with the queens from other colonies. And because they're so integral, the colony has a drive to have them and to raise them. And in the superorganism theory, forgive me, I'm just going to read this right off the slide. The term superorganism is used most often to describe a social unit of eusocial animals, where division of labor is highly specialized and where individuals are not able to survive by themselves for extended periods. The concept of a superorganism raises the question of what it is to be considered an individual. In terms of selection, the superorganism is the colony, not the individual bees. So in the superorganism theory, we think of the colony as sort of like a mammal's body, right? And the cells, the comb in the hive is the liver because it sort of holds on to toxins and processes things. And an individual cell is the uterus. The brain is the collective decision-making power of the workers. The queen is the ovaries. And in the superorganism theory, the drone is the flying testes. And I could have drawn that differently, and I didn't, and you're welcome. So we also often hear in beekeeping about being queen right. Colony's got to be queen right, how important it is to be queen right. It's not as important to be drone right, but the colony has a drive to be drone right because that is the other piece of the mating puzzle. So they want to raise their drones. And there, I've heard older beekeepers who've been around a lot say, it's just like the colonies are happier when they have their drones. And in the springtime, is in my part of the world, it's full on spring. There's pollen everywhere, and they're trying to make raised drones everywhere they can. Um, so back to the thinking. So I said in the beginning that there's a lot of thinking that drones are a drain on resources, that they don't do any contribute, they just eat a lot of honey. And there were a few studies done. There's one done by Delia Allen in Scotland, where she set up a lot of colonies that were given free, unrestricted ability to raise drones all season, and then an equal set that were restricted and not given the room to raise drones. And the drone right colonies actually made a little bit more honey and were slightly larger at the end of the season. There was also a study done in Dr. Seeley's lab that sort of found the opposite, that the drone right colonies that they made less honey. But it's not certainly not cut and dried for sure. So we're going to begin at the beginning with drones. Their life begins in a proper size cell. Drones are larger and they need a bigger crib. So every time a queen lays an egg, she puts her head in the cell and she feels around with her front legs to see how big the cell is. And then she pulls her head out, turns around, inserts her abdomen, and lays an egg. So if she felt that the cell was small, about 4.5 millimeters or so, or to 5, she will lay an egg that is fertilized, which means that she releases an egg, it comes down her oviduct and passes down by that little weird valve fold thing. And at that point, her spermatheca releases some sperm, either 1 to 8 sperm, 3 or 20 to 25, depending on which papers that queen read. And one of the sperm is going to make it to the egg and fertilize it. And then she deposits it out her sting chamber. But if she feels with her front legs that the cell is larger, if it's 6, 7, or 8 millimeters, when the egg comes down, it is not fertilized. And that egg is then deposited into this larger cell, which becomes a drone. So we know that the mechanism, there are lots of theories like what happens? Does the small cell squeeze the abdomen of the queen and that's how she knows to release, that's how her body knows to release sperm. But what they found is they cut the front legs off queens and found that those queens, here's our angry queen that got her legs cut off. The queens without front legs laid willy-nilly, fertilized eggs, unfertilized eggs with no correlation to the cell size. So that's how we know that that's that. So honeybees are what we call haplodiploid. The drones are haploid. They only have one set of chromosomes because it's an unfertilized egg, and the workers and queens, the females, have 2 full sets of chromosomes, so they have 32. There is a thing that can happen because of the way the sex determinant genes, there's a sex determinant gene on a chromosome, and there are different alleles that are on the sex determinant gene. So there are thought to be about 145 different sex alleles in all of honeybeedom. So the queen is going to have 2 sets, one from each set of chromosomes, and then the drone that she mates with is going to have 1 set. So if she happens to mate with a drone that's either she's related to, it's her brother, or she's just unlucky, then there is a situation where an egg can be fertilized with a sperm that has the same sex allele. And what you end up is a diploid drone. But these drones are smaller and they're infertile. And so they've sort of evolved to never reach it to maturity. So what you see in the hive is this shotgun brood pattern. You've probably heard of that, where about half of the cells are open. And that's because as the pupae is developing, the workers can smell that something is amiss. So they come in and they uncap it and they gobble it down. It's food, it's a protein, nothing is wasted. But what you end up with is half the brood that is not usable. And so this colony is doomed. Now, if the queen is really well bred, if she's mated with 50 or 60 drones and a couple of them have her same sex allele, it's just not a big deal. But if she is, if about half of her sperm come from, or, from a related drone, then that's pretty much doomsday on the colony. Because honeybee drones only have 1 set of chromosomes, sometimes recessive genes are expressed. So eye color, the dominant eye color in honeybees is black, and occasionally you will see white-eyed drones. And sometimes people send me pictures of drones that have, it looks like white patches on them, almost like they bumped into wet paint. That's usually when their last molt has not peeled off yet, peeled off their eyes. But a true white-eyed drone, even the three ocelli, if you see in that picture on the right, those three little white dots, um, that is what a true white-eyed drone looks like. And it's interesting. Also, if you have a white-eyed drone layer, a lot of the drones in the colony are going to have white eyes. So there's a really interesting paper coming out from a graduate student at Purdue about white-eyed drones, and they found the genetic marker, and it's really cool stuff. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, so we have haploid drone eggs and larger cells. And when you're first learning about bees, you're taught that all larvae are fed royal jelly for the first 3 days, right? Well, it's a little more complicated. There's actually three different types of jellies, and it just has to do with the ratio of the two components of the jelly. But for all intents and purposes, the biggest difference in drone brood and drone jelly is that they get more of it because they're bigger. And similar to workers, the last few days of their larval period, they're fed pollen and honey along with the brood food. So sort of like teenage boys, they're bigger and they'll eat you out of house and home at a certain point. And you're all probably familiar with this type of chart where it shows that everyone's an egg for the first 3 days, but then the drones have an extra day and a half on their larval period, and then an extra couple days of their pupation time. We all memorize these numbers for tests, right? 16 days to a worker, 21 for, I'm sorry, 16 days to a queen, 21 for a worker, and 24 for a drone. But what's interesting is these days are not set in stone. This is information from Mark Winston's book. And the drones can come out in early as 20 days or as long as 28 days, and workers can come out in 16 to 24. And queens hover right around that 16-day age. And the two factors that influence the time are temperature and food. So if it's really warm and they're well fed, they can emerge really early. And I had a situation, there's an apiary that I keep for teaching, and I had checked this colony and I knew that it wasn't anywhere near swarming. She hadn't even laid in the deep yet. She was just laying in the medium. And then my next teaching inspection was 3 weeks later. And I thought I should go a few days before. And I was like, no, I'll just wait. There'll be plenty of time to split them because according to the calendar with 21 days, they shouldn't be overwhelmed. But boy, had they gotten overwhelmed and they had already swarmed when I got there. So I was reminded they can emerge in 16 days, which is a lot faster. So the two factors are temperature and food. And if you look at the way the bees lay out their nest, the locations, workers' survival rates, egg to adult is 86%, while drones is only 55. So where they are made in the hive probably has something to do with that. If you give bees an empty frame with no foundation, they are amazing little architects. And what they do is they make small cells in the middle, and then the cells get larger and larger, and the drones are raised around the workers, and then, of course, pollen and honey in the corners. So the net effect of this is, especially in the early springtime, the drones are like insulating their more important sister workers. So if there's a cold snap, the drones are going to take the brunt of it. And then in terms of food, who do you think is going to get, is sort of like getting your coffee refilled in a restaurant. If you're sitting back in the corner, you may not get as much attention as if you're right in the middle. Now, if we use foundation, all foundation, and you don't give them drone size foundation, what you'll find, especially in springtime, is they're so desperate to raise drones, they're going to put cells anywhere they can, which usually means in between the frames and the different boxes. So you pull a frame out and you rip open all this drone brood. And this is just a photograph of a medium foundationless frame, and you can see the flat cappings of the worker brood in the middle, and drone brood looks like bubble wrap. So one thing to keep in mind, a lot of times people think, well, if I give them larger cells or if I let them make a larger comb, they'll raise too many drones. But the colony, the superorganism is constantly assessing needs, and they pretty much know when they can afford drones. And what they will do if let's say they're raising lots of brood, and there's a cold snap or it rains for 3 weeks, they will cannibalize. They'll practice this thing called brood trimming, where they cannibalize eggs, larvae, and even capped pupae as changes in temperature and resources dictate. So we don't need to worry about it so much. I pretty much give all my colonies the room to raise drones. And what I notice is, like right now, it's wall-to-wall drone brood, but as the summer goes on, they will use that space differently. So they'll end up storing nectar in it, sometimes pollen, or they'll raise little chunks of brood. So I'll pull out a frame and see drone brood in three little patches in different ages and stages. So they they are going to do a good job if it's a healthy colony of controlling and raising as much drone brood as they can afford. When does drone rearing happen? Well, it mostly happens in time for drones to be sexually mature to mate with queens during swarm season, which means it peaks 4 weeks before swarming. So this is my part of the world. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. We're in full-on spring right now, and the drone population is at its peak. It's definitely highest right now. They also raise drones during a nectar flow. So at any time when there's a little like nectar flow in my part of the world, sometimes there'll be the sumac or goldenrod towards the end of the summer. You'll see another little burst of drone brood rearing. This is a drone's life schedule. On day one, on his emerge day, his cuticles hardening, similar to workers, they can't fly. For the first week, they're fed primarily by nurse bees. You'll read and hear that drones can't feed themselves, which is really not true, by the way. I've raised them in incubators and they'll drink honey out of a cell. But they need the protein-rich diet that the nurse bees then can provide for them. They basically beg for food from the nurse bees and they feed them the regurgitated contents of their stomach, which has a lot of pollen in it. And they need that protein in order to become sexually mature. So they come into the world with all the sperm that they need, but it has to migrate from the testes to the seminal vesicles. And to mature, it needs lots of protein. So for days 1 to 12, the reproductive organs are maturing. Days 6 to 9, they take their cleansing and orientation flights. And then days 12 to 18, their mating flights begin. And when I back up to days 1 to 7, when they're being fed by nurse bees, the young bees are going to be the ones you see down on the brood frames because they live down there so that they can be fed by the nurse bees. And after a week, after they're about a week old, they're going to move up and be more like on the honey supers or out on the edges on the honey frame. So that's one way you can tell how old the drones are. So the drones have one job, and very few drones that are raised are going to get to fulfill their ultimate destiny, and that is to mate with queens from other colonies. So first, I'm going to tell you about how drones are equipped for their special job. But first, I'm going to show how they are different from workers, and compared to workers, they're lacking in many ways. So they have tiny mandibles. They don't need to be scraping propolis. They just have to uncap a honey cell. So their mandibles are fairly small. They have a short proboscis. They don't need a long tongue to mine nectar out of flowers. The worker's tongue is like 6 millimeters and drones is about 3. They don't have pollen collecting structures on their legs because they don't forage. And they don't have a slender crop because they don't forage. They don't need that multi-chambered stomach. And they don't have wax, hypopharyngeal, or nasonoff glands. And what makes them really fun to play with is they don't have a sting gland and they can't sting you. Um, so let's look at how they are equipped to carry out their one job. They have an incredible sense of smell. Their olfactory plates have 10 times the olfactory plates of workers. They actually have an extra segment on their antenna for smelling. So they have to be able to, y'all know how well workers can smell, right? They can smell honey. If you're eating some honey on the other side of your house is the apiary, they'll find you in a heartbeat. So they have to be able to smell these queens while they're flying in the air, and they can smell a queen from 60 meters away, they say, which is crazy. They have much larger compound eyes. They have more facets than workers, and the optic lobes of their brain are much larger to process that information because they have to spot those queens flying around. Their mandibles, so they be tiny, they do produce pheromones. So when they're out flying, they're filling the air with their mandibular pheromone. And they have larger flight muscles and broader wings because their one job is done flying. They do one job in the nest that scientists have found. Their thorax does generate heat for the brood. So when they're living that first week, easy life down on the brood comb where the nurse bees are feeding them, there's evidence that the nurse bees will bump them and then they vibrate their thorax, and that generates heat to keep their brood warm when they need that. So it's sort of like those spoiled kids who occasionally make their bed or load the dishwasher. They do contribute a little bit to life in the nest. So on this slide, I have a picture of honeybees mating. And there's nothing on there because it is literally impossible to see with a naked eye. You've got two little insects who are, 100 feet in the air at least, and it's just really difficult to see. And it wasn't until I think 1950s when they attached a kite to a queen and used a movie camera to film her that they could really understand what was happening because you cannot make bees mate in a lab. They won't A queen and a drone will show zero interest in each other. It's on a table. But once they're, 12 meters in the sky, it's a different story. So it's been very difficult to study, especially also since the drone's reproductive organs are all internal. But so what happens is this little drone, he sucks up lots of honey and gets a full stomach. Isn't he adorable? And then he grooms himself. He polishes his eyes and gets all the dust off so he can see the queens. And then he flies to places called a drone congregation area, or DCA, to try to look for queens to mate with. So think about these DCAs. They're about 30 to 200 meters in diameter, and the drones from many different colonies, there'll be 100, if not 1,000 drones in these DCAs, and they're flying around and they fill the air with that mandibular pheromone, sort of like when you walk into a bar and you smell beer, you know you're there. So that probably helps the other drones to orient. But what's crazy about DCAs is that they are mysterious. They go to the same places year after year. Now, drones don't do dances to communicate. They don't communicate directionality with each other at all. And most of them live to be 21 days old. So, and then they die out completely in the winter. So there's no intergenerational learning. So how do they know where to go? And it really is a mystery. Nobody knows. There's a DCA in Selborne, England that is said to have been existed since 1792, which is crazy. There's a podcast where this guy who's a British drone expert, Stephen Fleming, where he goes to this DCA and you can hear the audio of it. There's a link to this at the end too, but it's a really cool podcast episode. So though they be mysterious, there are things that scientists over the years have found about DCAs that are clues to where they are. They tend to be in depressions in landscape, and we know that drones and workers, given the option, they're going to fly downhill before they fly uphill. So depressions are a clue. You'll read that they follow visual cues, so they follow a tree line or a river or something, and then where this line of sight breaks up, like it's intersected, that's where they fly up sometimes. And you also read a lot that they happen where there's an open area that provides a windbreak, because they say mating in the wind is hard, and so they need this windbreak. So an open field lined by trees or a parking lot with tall buildings, that kind of thing. And there's also a theory that's pretty interesting, and it's definitely a possibility, that DCAs occur where there are slight magnetic anomalies in the earth. We know that all honeybees have iron particles in their abdomens, and workers will use magnetic fields to orient if they're deprived of their other senses. So this is definitely a possibility. And Gerald Loper, who did a lot of research with drones, really believes that this is what it is. It's a little bit difficult to prove, though. So the paths that drones use to fly to and from different DCAs, we call flyways. So they fly a little bit lower altitude in the flyways, and then when they hit a DCA, they fly up, they spiral up into the DCA, a couple hundred feet. On the right, there's a map of, there's a really interesting radar project where they use X-band marine radar in an area in Arizona, which is flat and doesn't have lots of big, beautiful hardwood trees like we have in Georgia and like you all have in California. So the radar, it's hard to use radar when you have a lot of trees, but this area was relatively open and flat. And so the dots are the DCAs, and then the dashed and straight lines are the flyways that they used. And so that those gray lines that make that sort of weird little almost stick figure like shape, is a wash line. And so that one curve follows the wash line, but then there are DCAs branching off of it that don't seem to have any visual cues. So it's sort of like sometimes they use visual cues, except for when they don't. And this is an 11-minute documentary that the USDA did on this on this research project. And there's a link to it at the end of the talk, and it's really hilarious. It's very 80s, and you should watch it. It's really cool. So now I have some videos of some DCAs, and hopefully you have a good screen and you can see that there's just thousands of bees in this area. So I was using a trap, and so there's definitely queen larvae. If you look at the bottom, you can see the comets. So these are drones chasing something. I like to think they're chasing a queen, but it could be anything because they will literally chase a dragonfly or anything once they get out there. This illustration is showing you how queens and drones have evolved behaviors to cut down on inbreeding. So drones tend to fly to DCAs closer to home, and usually there's a DCA within 200 or 300 meters of any kind of sizable apiary. So if you think about it, drones, most of them are not going to be able to mate. So they go to it, they suck up all this honey. They have about 30 minutes of flight time in their tank, and they fly to a DCA close to home, and they'll go to a few different ones on a single flight, and then they come back to suck up more honey and head back out again. But the queens, when they get to a DCA, you saw how many bees are on that video. There's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of drones to choose from. So she can afford to fly farther away. So what happens is when the workers come out, they travel about 26 feet off the ground, and the drones fly up about 85 feet high. And so they're flying at different heights. They will mate in the flyways if given the opportunity. As long as they're flying, they'll mate. But they've just evolved this behavior so that they fly at different heights, and then the queens are going to go farther from home before she flies up into a DCA. And I used to have a third of a mile on the drones and a mile for the queens, but the distances that they fly have everything to do with the density of the colonies in the area. So, but isn't that cool that they've evolved this behavior? I think it's fascinating. Sometimes I give this talk, and there are big queen breeders in the audience. And I've had people, I've had conversations, and they're like, I don't know about these DCAs. Put out these mating nukes, and I just watch the queens fly out. And when honeybees mate, it's actually an audible popping noise, pop, pop, pop. And they're like, I can hear the popping, and then the queen comes back and she's made it. So they don't wait, they don't go to DCAs. And that's true. If they're able to, if they're flying and they run into each other, they're going to mate. They're not going to wait to get to the DCA. However, does this situation, I swiped this photo from the internet. It said it was 500 mating nukes. This never happens in nature, right? There's never going to be 500 colonies on top of each other. So just because bees mate differently in this situation doesn't mean that DCAs don't exist and that DCA behavior isn't a thing. It's been millions of years of evolution to create these DCAs. In the wild, I think what the typical distance between colonies is about 1,600 meters. So it makes more sense that it would work, that DCAs happen, maybe not in a mating apiary, but in nature. So I'm going to talk about bee sex. I've already said, they have done on the wing, they're flying 13 to 15 miles an hour. It's very complicated. So what happens is an illustration from Mark Winston's book is a drone, this comet of drones, as you saw in the video, is going to chase a queen, and the biggest, strongest drone who reaches her first is going to be the first to mate with her. So he's going to grasp her with his first 4 legs. And at that point, the queen has to open her sting chamber. And I've read that she doesn't always open her sting chamber, so who knows why. But I like to think that honeybees figured out consent a million years before humans did. So if she has to consent, she opens her sting chamber. And at that point, the drone's endophallus, which is this huge part of his abdomen, it everts into her sting chamber. So the end of it goes into her sting chamber. And this action ruptures his abdomen, and he actually immediately is paralyzed. So from that point on, while they're copulated, she is carrying him, and then he falls to his death. So it takes 2 seconds. It's an audible popping noise. He flips backwards, and then he falls. So this is a photograph of an everted endophallus, and look how big that is, and compared to his abdomen. So it takes up a large part of his abdomen. You can see why it would hurt him and rupture his abdomen. It also comes out inside out from the way it was in his body. So it's sort of like a nitrile glove. Thank you, COVID. You have to blow on the fingers to get it out. So everything that you see was inside out on his body. So the end there of his endophallus, that light brown, sort of pale coffee colored, that is where the semen is swimming on mucus. And that end of it is the mating sign that stays in the queen, and the rest of it separates off. So the mating, maybe some of y'all have seen this when a queen comes back mated. So the end of the endophallus of the last drone she mated with is still in her abdomen. And so she mates with one drone, the mating sign stays in her, and the next drone comes up and is going to mate with her. So that previous drone's endophallus has to come out. And the way it works is, back to this picture. So if you'll remember what I said, because it comes out inside out, the part closest to his body is the first part that came out. So in that photo, I can't point to it, but there's some close to his body on his dorsal side, there are stiff, bristly hairs that point downwards. So as that part emerges, it sort of everts in two parts. And when that part emerges, it scoops out the mating sign of the previous drone and it sticks to, it either falls to the ground or sticks to his body. So then she gets back to the nest and she has to get cleaned up. So she scoots her bottom along the rug, sort of, some of y'all have witnessed that in your other pets. And the workers will clean her up and then she's good to go. So about 11, each drone has about 11 million sperm and she can hold about 11 million sperm. So her abdomen is sort of awash with sperm. So over the course of about 40 hours, that sperm will swim up into her spermatheca. So a little representative from each drone will swim up into the spermatheca. So how many drones does a queen mate with? Um, I like to, if I could have you all participate, I would ask you what you think. And most of us have read all the books where we hear anywhere from 12 to 20. That's sort of the typical number that read about. But so a paper came out by Dave Tarpey, and I think it was in 2019, this cryptic royal subfamilies. And that was really an interesting paper because in this paper, he was doing genetic analysis on the workers to determine how many drone fathers were in each colony. So he identified in 6 colonies, 327 total subfamilies. So that's 34 to 77 per colony. So those queens, the least drones that one of the queens made was 34, and the most was 77. And Dr. Tarpey has the Queen Lab at NC State where they also dissect queens and can tell you how many drones the any individual queen needed with. And so I thought this was interesting. I thought, well, the number must be higher in general. But he also did another paper that was sort of a literature survey that this histogram came out, and you can see at the bottom. And I had written to him, and I was like, he's very nice. He doesn't know me, but he answered my questions, which I love. Um, and I said, well, what about that cryptic royal subfamily paper? I thought you were showing that drones mate with a lot more queens. But he says that the average is still 14.6. It's just that there are a lot of outliers. And he also said, interestingly, that this study with the cryptic royal subfamilies, they chose those colonies because they were enormous. So the more drones that a queen mates with, the healthier she's going to be because you're going to get all these different traits represented with lots of different drone fathers. So if you have a really big colony that's really super healthy, your queen probably mated with a lot of drones. But I like this histogram because it tells say an average of 14.6 doesn't tell the whole story. If we were in a room, I would say, look around and let's find the average height of all the people in the room. And I don't know, it's usually like 5 feet 8, something like that. But nobody in the room is 25 feet tall, right? So that's why I think this histogram is interesting because there are definitely outliers on that bell curve has a wide range. And I want to encourage you all as beekeepers to make room for drones in your colonies. And there's a few ways to do it. You can, if you don't want to buy any special equipment, you can just take a medium or shallow frame and put it in a deep box. And especially in the springtime when they're raising drones, they're so desperate for drone brood that they'll lay out this big, gorgeous chunk of drone brood. But you can also buy these green drone frames, which are actually made for Varroa IPM to call Varroa, but they work great. And I like these too because you can easily spot where your drones are. I usually put them in the middle in the spring because the survival rate is much higher in the middle. And then as the summer goes on, I move them gradually towards the outside. And then by fall, they're going to load it up with nectar and pollen. So it'll be I'm on the outsides. And then in the spring, I bring it back to the middle again. You also, if you wanted a deep with drone brood, if you just pop the foundation out altogether, you don't even have to put a little starter strip on there so long as you put it between two brood frames, not honey frames. And they're so desperate to raise drones that they'll draw out big, beautiful drone comb on that frame. The reason why these green frames exist is, as I mentioned, is this IPM practice called Varroa trapping and drone brood. But and it's true that Varroa do prefer drones, and it's interesting. Varroa is such a difficult pest for parasite for honeybees because they never met each other in their previous lives. Like they have never had an opportunity to evolve together. But Varroa did evolve with Apis cerana, the eastern honeybee. And so Apis cerana tolerates Varroa and it doesn't kill them. And Apis cerana, they only reproduce in drone brood. They never jump into worker brood, which is interesting. And Apis cerana also keeps their brood nest in the summer between 99 and 101 degrees Fahrenheit. So those high temperatures are not good for mites. Um, but one of the things that, because, drone brood smells quite different, and Varroa knows what drone, and Apis mellifera drone brood must smell similar to Apis cerana because if they have the opportunity, they're going to jump into drone larvae. So the way this works is you put this drone brood frames in, and the workers lay it, and once it's capped, you pull it out and put it in the freezer, and it's going to kill the mites. Of course, it's going to kill the drone brood too. So what I encourage you to do, rather than just freeze it off the bat, is to take your capping scratcher and unfork a chunk of drone brood and inspect it for Varroa. And if you see several, if you see, any kind of amount, then I would probably freeze it. So I can tell on this picture there, I can see two mites. I can see three mites on that little chunk of brood of about 10-ish. So that's kind of a lot of mites. But I can also tell from looking at this picture that this is later in the season because I see a lot of shiny cells and because it's not solid cap drone brood. So in the springtime, I look at my brood patterns. If the brood pattern looks really solid, I always will unfork a little chunk of drone brood though, just to look at it, inspect it. And usually in the spring, there's not any Varroa in it, or there's maybe one, and I might grab another chunk again. But so inspect it. If you're not seeing Varroa in it, let the bees raise it. And what I can tell you usually happens is as the summer goes on, I usually freeze a couple. But I do like to let my colonies raise drones if they're nice. If they're not nice, they don't get to raise drones. I just put in the freezer anyway because I don't want mean genetics roaming around. So another thing to be aware of is that pesticides and miticides reduce sperm counts in drones. And we all know that the neonicotinoids are horrible. They reduce sperm counts by this one study about 39%. But even oxalic acid and amitraz can affect drone sperm. And I know that formic acid also has an effect on drone sperm. It just wasn't included in this particular study. The reason why I put this in here is because a lot of beekeepers coming into swarm season do a early season mite treatment just sort of as a matter of practice. And I do treat for mites, but I'm a small beekeeper, I'm a hobbyist. And so I can afford to sort of take the time to monitor and treat each colony as they reach the treatment threshold. But I am careful coming out of winter to not ever blanket treat and if I do need to treat, I try to get it done as early as possible because I don't want to be sending out drones that are not healthy and fertile. So we've covered drones, and now I'm going to talk about drone congregation areas and how to find them because we don't know much about them. And so if we can find more, if you talk to researchers, it's like, they will have heard of one, but people usually can't tell you where a DCA is. So I wanted to find drone congregation areas. I heard a talk about it and I thought it just sounded interesting. And this scientist had told me, oh, you just get a helium balloon and you put queen pheromone on it and you walk around and look for drones flying around it. I thought, well, I like to walk. So I got a balloon. Well, actually, I came over for that conference and got like a Mylar birthday balloon and ordered some queen pheromone, and it didn't work because it's just not going to go high enough. But I finally got together, and this is a picture. That red balloon is actually like 5 feet in diameter and it's filled with helium and there's some queen lure hanging from it. And I had read the books and it was like, okay, open area with a windbreak. So I looked at Google Maps and I saw the soccer field down the street from my house look like prime DCA. So this method really takes two people. You can also walk around with a pole, but that's also a little hard on your body to walk around with the pole with the lure on top because it needs to be kind of high up. So that's my buddy Courtney holding the kite string, and I'm back here with the binoculars. And this was that perfect day. It was not windy, the temperature was right, it wasn't too hot, it wasn't too cold. But we walked around that soccer field for an hour and didn't see a single insect, which was depressing. And then we went to a neighbor's backyard that he's just got a big, nice, round sort of bowl shape. We were surrounded by trees with the open area and didn't see anything. And then we went to an apartment complex that had tall buildings and didn't see anything. It was really depressing. And I went home and told my husband, "Oh, I didn't see anything." But helium is a finite resource, and there is actually been a worldwide helium shortage for many years. And it was like $100 to fill that thing up at Kroger. And the lady at the Kroger balloon department was also not very excited to see me. So the next day I was like, well, I'll just keep walking. But the next day it was dead on the ground. So I only got one day out of it. And I thought there's got to be a better way. So I went and got a mechanical drone. So just to keep it from being confusing, when I say drone, I'm talking about the cute teddy bears on the left, and I'm going to call the mechanical drone a UAV, which stands for Unmanned Aerial Vehicle. And y'all, I am not one of those people that was like, oh, I want a gadget. Like I was not very excited about it. It terrifies me a little bit, but I did it. So this was my first UAV. I really liked this one because it had these feet. It sat way up off the ground. And then you can see down near the bottom that brown tube. So that was what I attached my queen lure to. And for lure, the easiest thing to use is this product called Temp Queen, and it's artificial queen mandibular pheromone, which is a sex attractant. So the thing that smells like lemongrass is not a sex attractant. Wouldn't that be easy? But this is an easy product to use. You can keep it in your freezer. It'll be good for a long time. And it's made to put in colonies that are queenless if you want to keep laying workers from developing while you're rounding up a queen. So I have a little story about this QMP. I have a friend who's a beekeeper, and we were at a conference and there was a dinner speaker, and my friend's wife is not a beekeeper, but she'd had a couple glasses of wine. She came to the talk, and the woman doing the talk was talking about her life in beekeeping, and she had this slide of herself in Scotland with looking for DCAs, and she's like, at the end of the poll, there was QMP. And my friend's wife leaned over to him and said, "Did she say human pee?" So human pee is not a thing for this. You need QMP. So I use this Temp Queen, and you need something to attach it to that has a little bit of weight to it because you don't want it swinging around too much. And you want to use thin cotton thread because if it catches on a tree, you want the thread to snap and it break and not crash your UAV. So I have a friend who had read about this. She wanted to try it, but she didn't want to buy a bunch of hair rollers she didn't need. So she just used a prescription pill bottle and drilled holes in it. That works great. You just need something about that size so that your camera on your UAV can see it, and something just to weight it down a little bit. So when I first started doing this, I was worried that the propellers generate all this wind, right? And I didn't want it to be blowing on the QMP and maybe artificially creating a DCA, which as it turns out is impossible because I've tried it several times. But so I sort of inadvertently stumbled on this, making my lure be far away from my machine, but it's a good thing to do anyway. So my machine, it was about 20 feet. So I flew my UAV up over my face until I couldn't feel the wind anymore, and that was about 20 feet. So I try to make my lure 20 feet long where I can, and I'll tell you why that's a good idea in a second. So that's my first UAV on the right, that Phantom, which died a painful death. I don't know what happened. It just stopped working one day and I couldn't get it fixed. So all the new drones, they're just making them smaller and more compact and closer to the ground. So I used to tie that thin cotton thread to the feet of my Phantom, the white one. But now that the new ones are so low to the ground, when you tie thread on it, the thread starts bouncing when the propellers start, and you can get the thread wound around your propellers. So now what I do is I use this, you can buy little 3D printed feet to add a little bit of height, but I use this payload drop gear, which is a little device that fits around the waist of the drone and it avoids the sensors. And then I use about 3 or 4 feet of paracord. So that's the part closest to the drone, the UAV, so it doesn't blow up in the wind when the propellers start. And then I have the thread and the lure. Time of day is important. I have found that DCAs are absolutely rocking at 3 p.m. and there's nobody there at 2:30. And I used to think it was because I lived in the South and because it was warmer. And I heard from a researcher who was doing some work in Florida about DCAs, and she was experimenting with traps that she could sort of set and come back and monitor. And she was looking from 12 to too, because that's what the book said. And she almost gave up her project because she wasn't finding any. But when she started coming after three, she was finding drones in the trap. So I don't really try to look before 3 p.m. And so I thought that that was maybe just in the South. And then I was in Massachusetts looking for DCAs, and it was the same thing. 2:30, nothing. 3 o'clock, they were rocking and rolling. When I took these pictures, I was really excited because those are clearly drones on the lure. But it's about, if you have tens of drones, if you have 10 or 20 drones, you're not really in a DCA yet, but you're in a flyway. So that's good information. You know you're in the right direction, but a true DCA is going to have hundreds of bees in it. So this is a video of a DCA, and this is a good example of why you want that long line. So you can see all the bees trailing around the lure, but you also can see all the drones filling the area, flying even up into the UAV camera. And notice there's a little stream flowing under there. And this one again. And notice in both of these videos that, is this an open area with a windbreak? No, it's over tree canopy. And I'm finding a lot of DCOs over tree canopy. And I kept going back to that soccer field where I had the balloon because I was like, this has got to be the DCA. And one day I sort of accidentally flew over a front yard of a neighbor that was covered in trees on my way to the soccer field. So like 2 lots down from that soccer field is a booming DCA over tree canopy. It's crazy. And then I also went back to my friend's house with that I took the balloon. The backyard was like a bowl shape. And in the trees that lining that bowl shape is a DCA. It's really interesting that the drones, like maybe you'll get like 10 or 15 drones will follow it when you leave the DCA area and they'll stay on the lure, but they won't come. It's fascinating. They have their dividing line and they won't cross it. So this video that I just finished showed you, I want to show you where it is. It was at DCA 2. It says Silverman's DCA 2. And that star shows you where the apiary is. So it's about 200 meters from the apiary. But if you look from the apiary, look at all those what do they call it? Landscape features that the drones could follow. Like there's a field, there are roadways, and I flew in this whole area. But the DCAs, these two DCAs are in the middle of the trees with absolutely no you know, landscape feature. So I'm finding that that is not true, that the open areas with landscapes, about more than half the DCAs I've found have been over tree canopy with no landscape features that they're necessarily following. So, and a lot of them I'm finding, even I'll get home and I'll see, like on that first video, I'll see a little bit of creek. So a lot of times they are over creeks. And sometimes where there's flowing water, you have more mineral deposits and more iron. So it's making me think that maybe that magnetic anomaly thing is a possibility. This is my citizen science website project. It's called mapmydca.com. So it's a free website. It's got, so if you can look at the tabs at the top, you can read all about drones and about DCAs and how to find them. Very briefly, what I've talked about tonight. And then you can click on view the DCA map in the corner, and you see a map of all the DCAs that people have pinned on the website. So anybody who finds a drone congregation area can pin it on the website. It's free, get an account, and then anybody who wants to can download all the DCA data. So this is my little field of dreams. I want people to go find DCAs and then post them, and then I'm hoping that some young scientist is going to come along and be able to crack the code and figure out what is happening here. There's Esra is a big map company, and they do track magnetic fields, but they are much broader than on the little micro scale right now. But who knows? Maybe they'll find it. If you zoom in, if you roll over any of the pins on the map, this little window pops up and you can click on the details and you can see what that person has entered. And I have YouTube videos of all the DCAs that I found. So this is the information that is downloadable. So tonight I want to point out a DCA that was put in by a guy named Bernie Bernstein in Bangor, Maine. And on the form I have, like, what was your method? Did you use a UAV, a helium balloon, or other? And he clicked other. And he told the story about how he frequents this particular McDonald's. And he's noticed a lot in the spring and summer months that he finds blown out drones in the parking lot. So he knows that there's a DCA there, and there's a Chick-fil-A in Georgia on the Perry exit of 75 that some folks from the B Lab noticed a bunch of blown out drones on the parking lot, and they looked up and saw drones flying around the sign. So you never know when you might stumble upon a DCA. So keep your eyes peeled. Most of them I think are evergrass, and that's why we don't notice them, but they might be a parking lot. It could be anywhere. The one thing I don't cover in this talk is how to fly UAV. It's a whole another thing. But you know what? You don't have to, if you're interested in that, great, go get one. But people who have UAVs usually are looking for reasons to fly them, especially if it's just a hobby. So, and the other thing is drones are attracted to, I don't know what if it's the motor, the hum, but they do fly up at the UAVs. And so YouTube is rife with videos where beekeepers are like, or where drone pilots say, oh, my drone was attacked by a swarm of bees protecting their queen or whatever. And you look at the video footage, it's drones. You know, they just happen to fly into a DCA and the drones are attracted to it. So anytime I meet someone that says that they're a UAV pilot, I ask them, is your UAV ever been like attacked by bees? And only one guy told me, and it was at downtown where it's not legal to fly. So I mean, it's just not easy and probably wouldn't be welcomed. So I haven't been able to follow up on it. But you can ask people, and if they say yes, then ask them where it was. And they call it drones got their name because of their sonorous buzz. They have a deeper buzz. And when you're in a booming DCA and there's not a lot of ambient noise, you can hear it, which is really cool. So you can go check it out because that's another way to find DCAs. Um, so I'm going to close with this story where, so in Georgia, the law says that if your feet are on public property, then you're allowed to fly over private property. So that's the law in Georgia. I don't know in California, but sometimes it's, you might not be met with welcomeness. So I'm going to close with this story about how I was flying and I was standing in a cul-de-sac and I was flying over some houses about just like a mile from my house one afternoon. I wasn't finding anything. I was getting ready to wrap it up anyway, and this pickup truck pulls up behind me, and this guy goes, "What are you doing?" He didn't say hi or anything, and I'm like, "Oh, actually, I'm doing honeybee research, but I don't want to offend you. I'm gonna." So I landed my, let me just land my UAV, and I'll be on my way. And he was like, "Well, what do you mean honeybee research?" And so I told him a little bit what I was doing, and he goes, "Oh, well, I know a beekeeper." And I was like, "Yeah, what beekeeper do you know? You never know, I might know them." And he was like, "No, she doesn't live in Atlanta. She lives up in Cumming. I know her from kayaking." And I said, "Oh, is it Kelly Campbell?" And he was like, "Oh, yeah, it is Kelly." So he ended up asking me to fly back up and take a picture of his house and email it to him, which I did because I'm nice. But so then I'm driving home and I'm not even halfway there. It's like a half a mile away, and I get this text from my friend Kelly with a screenshot from her conversation with this guy where he writes, "Some bee lady was flying a drone over her house today saying she was looking for male honeybees zooming over my treetops. WTF? She said she knew you, so I figured she had to be cool, so I didn't shoot her." So I live in Georgia and people love their guns here. But regardless, you need to be respectful. And if you're going to do this and realize that sometimes people are offended and just, we're all ambassadors for stinging insects. We're used to that. So just be polite and people will usually respond in a nice way. So that is the end of my talk. Here's the promised QR code if you want to look anything up. And I think Ian's been monitoring the chat. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Or you can unmute yourself and ask questions if you'd like. However you want to work it.
Thank
Is
you
Ian?
very much. Thank you very much, Julia. Yeah, so if folks want to unmute themselves and ask questions, or you can put questions in the chat. Um, while we wait for those questions to come in, I'll ask a question, Julia. So we are like the club this spring for the first time is purchasing or allowing members to purchase mite resistant queens or a strain of queens that have been bred for mite resistance. And so obviously we're excited to be having those in our colonies, but we're also part of the motivation, the folks who are heading it is to really get those genetics out into the ecosystem here. What recommendations would you have for folks who might be introducing those queens in terms of their production of drone production? to kind of, expand that introduction of the genetics into our area.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's an issue with those queens, right? Is that you have to keep buying them because that trait is bred out. And so yeah, I knew a guy who said he wanted everybody who had a VSH queen he was giving them a green drone frame because he was like, these are the drones that need to be out there. And I made a reference to that if my colonies aren't nice, they don't get to make drones. But it's the same thing. I have a couple of testy colonies and I pull every bit of their drone brood. They do not get to reproduce. So it would be a good idea, yes, to definitely let your colonies raise their drones, especially in the early season. Put that drone frame in the middle, and if enough people are doing it, it will definitely help your second and third generations to retain some of those traits for sure. Hmm.
Great. Other questions?
I know it was a long talk. Maybe I already answered all your questions. So I was like, wow, that was 55 minutes. Um, I can't see the chat, so I guess is there nothing
Yeah, I'm watching it.
looking at? Okay.
Yes, just praise in the chat.
Praise is good. I'll take it. Well, yeah, and I'll show you this slide. If anyone is dying to come to Atlanta, Georgia, I'm having a drone workshop in May. It's been a 1 day thing, and um, it's going to be this lecture like times three, several hours of drone lectures, and then I've got a friend who does instrumental insemination is going to do a demo, and then we're going to get into some colonies that have drone come, and we're going to do the uncapping thing, and then we're going to break for lunch, and then spend the afternoon in a DCA and trap drones and fly the UAV and stuff. So um, I know the airport situation is crazy. Probably, hopefully, things will be calmed down by then, but just in case. But does anybody have any questions? You can unmute. Otherwise, you all can go to dinner and I can go to bed.
Julia, if you were, I'll ask another one other question I have a question about is if you were to be setting up, I know you talked about the distance of, the drones will travel versus the queens when mating on average. If you were to, let's say, want to set up a yard where you were producing drones that were going to be mating with a queen in another area, what distance would you want to set that second yard?
That's a
Like,
great question.
where would you
Yeah.
want to place those drone production colonies?
So, so I remember the Jerzy Wojcicki, who was a Polish researcher who worked on drones his whole career, and he died in recent years. He was like 96 and he was still doing research. And he said you should saturate an area about 3/4 of a mile around your queen right apiaries. And I think Larry Connor says like a mile or 2 miles. So there's quite a range there. But it also depends on how many mating colonies you have. So you saw that picture, right? So if you have a lot of stock in a small area, you could probably keep it pretty close. But otherwise, so those are the two numbers that the experts that I've read is 3/4 of a mile to 2 miles, but as much as you can surrounding them. Yep. And again, you live in a very highly populated area, so do I. So it's different for people out in the country who don't have a lot of other beekeepers around. They can kind of control it a little bit better. Hmm.
Well, thank you very much, Julie. I think I'm excited to see. Hopefully, our club and people in the association will go out and search for some drone colonies, and you'll start seeing some dots popping up on
That'd be
the
great.
map,
That'd
my
be great.
DCA. Yep.
I tried to fly when I was there last month, but it was too windy that afternoon, so that sometimes happens. And just ask people who have UAVs. They might have found one, and you can go check it out. But thanks for having me. It was nice to see you again, Ian, and
Yes.
nice to see everybody else on the call. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Julia. Good evening,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you again.